Hello everybody and welcome to this video on transitions and self-determination, which are very much interlocked, as we will find. So let's move on. So when we're looking at transitions and self-determination, the two go hand in hand. So when we're talking about transitions, we're thinking about any movement from one environment to another. It includes changing location or the tasks or even the social connections. And there's two types of transitions we'll look at. Predominantly today, we're going to look at vertical transitions, and they're the significant changes in environments such as from home to school or school to work, where it's a major difference in location, people, everything. Different changes are horizontal, where some elements of the environment might be the same, but we might be moving between different classrooms or different people or going to bed, changing subjects from maths to reading, things like that. They're horizontal transitions, which follow the same process but just on a different time frame because they're less elements to be considered. Now, it's really important in terms of looking at how we organise transitions or how we facilitate them, in making sure that self-determination is a key component. And really what we're talking about self-determination, it's very good to use the label, but really be clear about what that means. It has when an individual has control over choosing the best options for any given situation and is able to access the skills to implement those options. And they've got the support and cooperation of people around them to get that sense of belonging. So in terms of these concepts, which we will use throughout this presentation, there's the autonomy, which is control, having that choice. There's the competence to be able to exercise that control. That's really important. So that other key element of self-determination that we are always mindful of. And that last thing is relatedness, or that belonging, and that is that ability to feel part of a wider group of people, a wider environment. So we'll keep with that focus, but just that is going to be where we are constantly looking at how do we arrange those things, how do we create those situations, and what do we need to do in terms of support to enable them to happen. So again, coming back to some different definitions, just to make sure we've got our heads really around what self-determination is. It's really linked to the individual's ability to demonstrate those skills, such as self-awareness and goal setting and problem solving, making decisions, being able to understand and manage themselves and advocate for themselves. And it's important that those things don't just happen for anybody. So for many people, for all of us, we need to develop those skills. And that's really important that we facilitate that to happen. So Desi and Ryan, use the classic definition with the autonomy, competence, and relatedness that drive self-determination. So these are really important because they ensure that if we have conditions around those three components, then we will actually ensure that self-determination increases and people will be able to take control of their own self-determination, which is really important. So just looking at that, it's really important in terms of transitions, because what transition strategies are really about is facilitating that student's sense of autonomy, relatedness, and competence, so that they feel part of the process, in control of the changes that are going to happen, which are going to be quite challenging in many ways for all of us. So feeling like the challenge is there, but the challenge is well within our reach to be able to cope with is really important. So two types of transition participation in terms of how transitions are organised for the individual. Now, passive is more conducted and involved with the person as a participant. So it's organised around them. Now, this is not to say that there's anything wrong with this, even though self-determination is not really part of this necessarily, but sometimes it may be part of the overall process where institutions or people need to have some level of discussion to develop some systems changes or accommodate different parts of the design or the planning in which the individual is not part of. But we need to be aware that passive organisation or participation has real limitations and is quite exclusive of self-determination. So active participation is where, the reactions, perceptions, all those motivations and the concerns of the individual are really at the centre of the designing phase. So building confidence and familiarity are built in, and they're also learnt. So we facilitate that skill building that's really part of it. And this actually creates those connections with the people and places that we need to sort of guarantee or create, further support. So individuals are very much co-designers of the transition and involved in all the steps. Now, it was interesting. Nuskanal did looked at transition strategies, 27 studies reviewed, used by schools, and only 15 had a student-centred approach. Less involved support from parents. Most of the focus was on preparing the receiving teachers or personnel on how to manage autistic students. So it was more about getting the places or the people in the places ready rather than the student being part of that process. So this is where the passive can fall down if it doesn't have an active ingredient as part of the process. So let's have a look at the difference in timing and planning around the different transitions. Now we'll look at the vertical transitions first, because as I say, that's the primary focus of what we're looking at here in this video. So talking about those major transitions, it could be from home to school, such as into kindergarten, or into preschool, or from preschool into kindergarten. School to school, major changes in people, location, levels of school, from primary into high, whatever. It could even be from high school into senior school. It could be school into further study and school to work. Any of those are just examples, and there are others depending on those individual circumstances. Now, each of these start well before the final change is made, and this is for all people. If you are deciding what what occupation or what training, what university courses are in, you are making decisions most likely 3 or 4 years ahead of scheduled. You're choosing electives in year 9. So people are constantly in, a state of forward thinking, and it's in the back of their minds or in the front of their decision making, depending on the situation. So it's no good sort of thinking that transitions are something to be just dealt with at the time frame between the two two locations, or the two things, or when the change occurs. So it really, at least 12 to 18 months would be a minimum for any of those vertical changes. We need to start thinking about it. Doesn't mean we have to do all the bits and pieces, but we need to start looking at perceptions, looking at expectations. What do people know? All those things, and we'll look at that in a moment. to understand what are the types of things we need to be doing. So now horizontal transitions go through much the same steps as we'll be talking about soon in terms of planning for a horizontal or for a vertical transition. But it just, because it's just going from classroom to playground or from play to bed or something that's much more immediate, we can just look at the similar steps but look at a much more immediate time frame. But the planning process will be the same, but just it's a bit more within our realm of capability or our realm of availability to do a lot of the things, a lot of the steps themselves. So let's have a look at some of these. Step one, getting that awareness, the perception of the change. What do they know? Sometimes we will think, oh, kids, they're not thinking ahead. But if they've got siblings, if they've got other people in the family, they are very aware of those changes and what happens, of going to school and seeing other kids going to school, of being out in the community, seeing schools, finish up and people moving. So they're very aware that there are expectations and there are changes that are made and that they will be part of it. So we might think they're not really, in tune with some of those things, but and be surprised how aware and what sort of perceptions they have already made. Whether it even be from their reading, their books that they've read to, or the TV shows. So much provides an opportunity for kids to get an awareness of what is to come. So that's why we really need to get that 18 to 24 months ahead of time. So working out what they're thinking, and that provides a good starting point, because initially it brings up some of the issues that they might see for themselves. Now, about 12 months before, it's good to have some visit or a walkthrough. It can be really, casual. It can even just be a visit with a sibling or something but just to be familiar with the environment, the noise levels, the various visual stimulation that might be the familiarity with where the entrance is and what's required with parking and things like that. All those things are just provide that opportunity to identify some of the barriers that might come up, that might appear for that individual in terms of what their expectations are when they've got to come in for real. So that will be really important to both communicate, and communication for many kids, depending on whatever age, will be in terms of sometimes direct conversation, but more often than not, it may just be watching for reactions or watching for indications that certain things are creating levels of stress. So this is where it's really important that initial visit is most probably done by someone who knows the person really well, so that they can actually pick up on those nuances when anxieties start to appear, that they can pick them up and just make a note of them, and not necessarily discuss them at the time, but come back to them when things are a bit more relaxed, and have the opportunity to say, oh, I noticed when you walk through the gate there, that gate's certainly a big one, and get their reaction to it. Just finding ways of assessing those reactions is really important, and then being able to articulate them in some way in consultation with the person is really important. Step 3, looking at ways. And that's where that person is going to be really important to be able to translate some of those concerns, but working with parents, the educators and others on ways to remove the barriers would be a priority, because that is going to take take some time in terms of stepping it out and working out what's going to be the best way, what skills, because if we're looking at autonomy, what choices we need to make, what skills we need to develop both for the individual and for the environment that they're moving into or away from, and recognising where there might be a sense of belonging or who they might be able to relate to in the process. So that's where that really comes down to that. What are we looking at here? Giving them control, giving them the skills, the self-efficacy, the sense that they can actually handle the challenges and that connection with others. So step 4, we're going to build those skills, provide those opportunities, walk through those situations, and whatever we're going to do, we're going to have a look at the environment in terms of assessment, and then start planning some visits according to those priorities. So in terms of who are they going to connect to, what opportunities are going to do to apply some of those skills, so sort of matching the style of the visits with the skills that we've worked through, and not just sort of going for broke initially, but just gradually building. It doesn't have to be lots of visits. It's just that they're planned, and there's, we're looking at the duration, who they're talking to, how many connections they're making, all that stuff. So we're just really, it's planning it according to try to match the readiness and the skills that accompany the person, and ready them for the challenges that any visit to a new place will enact. And then step 4, just consult regarding what's going on with the larger group, because often in most of those major vertical transitions, the person may not be just doing it themselves. There may be a whole heap of other activity around them. So it's important that they identify with that as well, or lock into that, and it's coordinated, so the two work side by side without and worked out where they integrate and where they need to be independent and provide an opportunity for more one-on-one support. So it's really important just to have that planning when we're ready, because that planning is going to happen usually in the wider group in a shorter time frame. So it gives us a fair bit of preparation in terms of getting kids ready for that, so that they may have already had a number of visits, they've already exercised that control, they've already used their skills to overcome some of the individual challenges. So in some ways, they are actually ahead of the group that's coming in, who will be just as unfamiliar and just as anxious about moving into a new environment, but less ready than possibly the kids that we've been working with. So some of the strategies, I'll just go through these reasonably quickly, because they pretty well just make sense, and part of that overall strategies we would apply. So maintaining or facilitating that communication between the stakeholders is very important. If it's schools, if it's the work, school, whatever it is, just liaising with the current and the receiving places is really important. Having the parents involved all the time is really important, that liaison with the parents, because you're not just developing self-determination for the individual, you're actually doing that same self-determination with the parents, who will have to negotiate, mediate, most probably quite a bit of the into the future. So making that introduction of the parents and the individual to the institution is really important to to facilitate early on so that they're comfortable with the people that are supporting their child, but also that the the institution is comfortable with working with the parents. So everyone has that foot in the door before it actually comes down to having to deal with the first challenges, that come up through the normal operation of things. So that's where that planning comes in early, where there are not issues, there are just familiarity. We can build that communication, and it's very much part of the student having a role in that communication, so that everyone, especially the new environment, has an awareness of how to communicate, what works in terms of communication with the individual, so that they're not feeling like, well, we don't know what's going on. We can actually maintain that ongoing discussion and involvement of the person. So looking at what's available for the students in terms of support is really important. So give them information on what types of settings, what type of schedules they might be, setting up some of the role modeling or role plays or visual supports, visual schedules, social stories, comic conversations, anything that we can do that gives them a familiarity with what's likely to happen. Giving that support during the transitions, and that's why I think that important to have that, especially at the early stages, someone who is familiar, who can read the cues, who can actually make the prompts that are required to facilitate some of the skills that hopefully you've worked through prior to that first walk through the door. So it might be an adult one-on-one, it could be a teacher's aide that's working with a student if they're already working with them already. It could be someone that they know, it could be a brother or sister, could be just someone who is providing that support and familiarity in what is an unfamiliar environment. And of course, just keeping track of that and making sure that we're picking up those cues, and if we're picking up the anxiety or the confusion, that we either address it or we take a break from it. So having that visit before is really important. Individual school visits, whole class visits, and this connection with others is important because it's so much part of the autonomy. It can be connecting with the peer groups that they're going into, but there may even be opportunities for some cultural connections with students with a range of other diverse needs, or people in their local area that they already know, that they're familiar with anywhere where we can see that the connections might already be established that we can utilise. So getting the environment is really important. So, doing some of that modelling, rehearsal, auditory cues, advanced instruction, priming, all those things need to be developed for people to be familiar with as they engage with this unfamiliar individual that they are needing to communicate with, and they need to have a few familiar approaches that the individual can use, that have been worked through with them. So there's a connection when we're not both trying different things. Let's use the example of the school. The teachers are not using one system, and the student doesn't know that system and is totally unfamiliar with it. So common cues, common prompts are really important. That they can be familiar, they've been communicated, so that they're ready. And soon as that familiarity is there, there's a certain level of trust and a reduction in the stress, and therefore things can become a little bit more organic, a little bit more comfortable, and that's going to be really important. And the last thing is just making those final adjustments with the environment. What are we going to do? How are we going to, if there's a level of stress detected, how do we have the opportunity for a sensory break? How are we going to look at the environment and pick out some of those changes rather than walking into them already as they are? So hopefully through the process of the transition, things like the schedules and the activities can be adjusted to meet the preferences of the person. So that communication is had, and if we're able to have that open discussion, then already we're developing systems that are both comfortable for the individual, but also for the school or the teacher, and for possibly even the other kids in the classroom. As we mentioned before, having that ability to move into the location ahead of time is really good. And maybe if there's certain tasks that need to be conducted, choosing of subjects or whatever they are, then there's more time allowed. So we might need to make more time for things, familiarity with a canteen, things like that, where the toilets are, all that stuff may take longer. So making that adjustment to ensure that we have that time to allow it, and it's not just pushed along, which is only going to increase that stress as well. So the biggest challenge is avoiding uncertainty and confusion. And no matter who we are, when we move into a new environment, there's that element of uncertainty and confusion. I remember talking to my daughter about going to a new high school, and she sort of said, yes, she was, really scared, but really looking forward to it. So, that confusion between the two, you want it to happen, but you're worried about what it's going to look like because it's just so different. So how do we avoid this? And it comes back to that self-determination, having that autonomy. Are they aware and familiar to some degree about what's coming? Are the barriers that are significant to them identified and dealt with, either through, any of those measures that we just talked about, a certain familiarity or a certain, modelling or whatever, that we can actually anticipate them. The other thing is, have we looked at the competence? What are the skills that you need to have under your belt to provide that confidence? That doesn't mean, you're not completely confident, because just having the skills, you need to actually apply it. But if you've got to apply it and you haven't got the skill, it's impossible. And that's what really stresses us out. If we can prompt, if we can cue, we're cueing towards some skills, something that is familiar, that we've actually worked through, that we've practiced, then that will help us to navigate those barriers. And immediately there's a level of confidence and satisfaction that comes from overcoming those challenges, and that is going to be really escalate into a lot more security and a lot more safety in the environment. And that relatedness is that other thing. There's connections to support from a variety of people. So having that familiarity, whether it be with teachers aides, with the other kids, with certain peer groups that have a greater level of connectedness to that person or a cultural conformity or whatever, to allow them to have a collaborative sort of strength in facing the challenges is really important. So really, the key element is that focus on self-determination, clear process that starts early with perceptions and identification of barriers, and gradually works through the skills and the steps to make that all happen for everyone in the process. And the importance of involving the parents, I can't overestimate, because it's so much part, because what you're doing is you're bringing them into the whole process. For them, it's most likely just as stressful and just as challenging in terms of navigating some of those major vertical transitions. So having it all together is really important. So hopefully that's important, and hopefully that's been useful to you. And thanks for watching.